there's no one out there that actually provides a list of criteria that the early church was using in order to identify what should be included in these lists. But it's from the letters that we have and the books that we have in the New Testament, the literature, as well as certain comments that are made by people like Eusebius and others that would seem to suggest that there were at least four important criteria involved in selecting the literature that would come to be included in our New Testament. The first criteria is apostolicity. Was it written by an apostle or one of his colleagues? This would be probably the main criteria used. So most of the New Testament literature is attributed to an apostle. You do have a few, like the Gospel of Luke, who himself admits in the first 3 or 4 verses of the Gospel he was not an eyewitness, but he got his information from the eyewitnesses. Then you have the Gospel of Mark. Mark was not necessarily an eyewitness. Early church tradition says that he got his information from Peter. So in essence, Mark's Gospel he's reporting the memoirs of the Apostle Peter. You also have Hebrews, and we have no idea who wrote Hebrews. But a lot would guess that would be one of the colleagues of the apostles, maybe a colleague of the Apostle Paul, since much of the thought contained in Hebrews is Pauline. Let me go back. After an apostle or being one of the apostles' colleagues, were the teachings orthodox? This would be a reason why Hebrews was accepted in the New Testament, because the teachings were orthodox. And it was a lot believed that either Paul wrote it or one of his colleagues did. If the teachings within that piece of literature was not orthodox, well, and orthodoxy was determined by, was this some of the apostolic teachings or the teachings that we would think came from Jesus? Well, then it wouldn't be included. You'd want it to be orthodox teachings. A third would be, was it relevant to the church of that day? If it was relevant to the church, then they kept it. So if it was written by an apostle or one of his colleagues, if it was orthodox and it was relevant to the church, they kept it. It might be for the reason that it wasn't relevant in some cases, that some of the New Testament, what was written by an apostle, would not be included in the New Testament, and it became no longer extant. And then finally, you're looking at relevance, widespread and long-standing usage within the church. Is this something that these teachings were not only relevant to the church, but the churches had long-standing and widespread usage in using this literature in their worship services and regarding it as authoritative and divinely inspired? When these 4 criteria were met, then and they debated over whether some of the literature would meet this criteria. Then it made it for interesting debates, and we're going to look at how some of the churches and the church leaders would, over the years, what kind of conclusions they came to. But these were, generally speaking, these are accepted to be the criteria that they went by.